Welcome back to It All Counts, the podcast where we continue to learn and grow and get better together. I have a very special guest, Dr. Brittany Collins. She's a special person. She works at the University of Louisville. She also does private practice. Dr. Brittany Collins, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Coach. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you.
Doc, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, a little bit about myself. So I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, but also trained in sport performance as well. Oftentimes you hear that as sports psychologist. I'm a military kid, so born in England, attended kindergarten through third grade in Japan, Korea, Hawaii, and then became a collegiate athlete when we moved to Ohio. So I'll say roots were in Ohio and lived in Ohio the longest. Also a mom, amazing kids. So that's a little bit about me.
That's pretty good, Doc. Now, Doc, I have a question to start this. I have plenty of questions, but one of the most important for me is if I'm a parent and looking for counsel, how would I know between a psychologist, psychiatrist, a sports performer, or a life coach? How would I know the difference?
Oh, those are amazing questions. Like each individual can pour into that child or your kid in a different way, but you also have different trainings and skill sets. So if you, for example, want to go to a performance coach, they're going to assist on the court, field, mental skills training, but they are not licensed clinicians. So when you think about more severe diagnoses, clinical mental health, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, that's when you want to go to a licensed clinician. And usually when you hear sports psychologists, they're trained to do both the mental performance skills in addition to being a licensed clinician. Life skills coach. That's actually where I started off wanting to be a life skills coach. I felt like that was what my purpose was. And then I added the additional license. But that is an individual that still has training, but just not going through practicum internship to be clinically licensed. So that's like a basic overview of each. But I would definitely think about what your kid is like presenting with and their concerns. And then look at the individual's background to see if it would be a good fit, because it's all about a collaborative relationship.
I like that. Now, Doc, with your experience as a former athlete, but also public school teaching, having children, how do you pick up on the signs when you see a kid? Can you see something before they even come to you?
I believe that I can, and that just, I would say, is a spiritual gift more so, that God-given wisdom and discernment to be able to pick that up. And then I just added the education and background to strengthen those gifts, right? Those God-given gifts. So I do believe I can pick up on it. Of course, I believe when you're closer and there's a more intimate connection, oftentimes our vision can be blurred. So as a mom, that clinical hat is not on all the time, right? It's no different than being a pastor and, have a PK and a preacher's kid, right? Sometimes you might not pick up on things or a coach with your kid, right? And a skill set in sports. So I also have to be able to take a step back and say, even with my own kids, I might not be able to pick up on some things. And I need to be able to know, like, hey, I'm a mom in this setting. And I need to know that there's some things that I might see, but I need you to help me with that area of expertise that you have as a mom where my vision is not blurred.
No, I see.
So hopefully that answers the question.
That does help. That does help.
Okay.
So for a coach and for the audience, I worked with Coach Collins for a year and a half at the University of Missouri, and she did a phenomenal job with our student athletes. And to be truthful, she had so much on her plate because pretty much every student athlete was going to her for services because she has the ability to communicate it, but also be transparent. But in playing sports, I think it helps. But Coach, how do you help a coach at all levels see the changes in the kid's behavior? How do they report that? How do they sit down and talk to a kid? Because nowadays you have to be very careful in what you're saying to a kid.
Yes, sir. So that's that. I would say, how do I talk to a coach in reference to, and I'm going to clarify the question, About an athlete or
Yes.
about their own care?
Yes. So, in the combination, I probably mixed a lot in there, but how do you help
That's
the
okay.
coach in communicating, but also take it a step further because you just helped me. How do you help when you communicate with just a student athlete, what do you relay to the coach to help the coach in dealing with the athlete?
Oh, that's good. Okay. So yes, of course, being a clinical counselor, I'm under HIPAA, right? And
Yes.
so under HIPAA, I cannot break that confidentiality. So the biggest thing I do is first empower and advocate for the athlete to speak on their own, to have their own voice. And so a lot of times in sessions, I am asking and working with the athlete to be able to go back with their coach. And then before I say anything moving forward, to even give a summary, I ask the athlete, are you okay with me stating this to your coach and advocating on your behalf? Not sharing all the information, but being able to summarize what are some themes that I'm seeing and where are some areas that I can communicate with the coach to say, hey, this is where you can be an advocate and continue to pour into the athlete as well. And I'll continue to do the work one-on-one. But I usually summarize themes. But first, I do ask for that approval because that maintains the relationship and trust of the athlete. And usually it's in meetings where we collaborate. And maybe it's, hey, when you say A, B, or C, this individual shuts down. Or maybe it's this individual doesn't do the best with yelling, right? And so they shut down because it triggers them in a certain way. And that's all that needs to be said. But it's just then giving maybe some skills overall for the athlete to adapt as well, because it's again, collaborative relationship. It's not just one-sided. And then how the coach can continue to work on that too, to kind of pour into the athlete. But first it's about permission and empowering the individual to use their own voice.
Now, Doc, how do you handle a situation? Because obviously you've been at high level programs. How do you handle a situation where you have a head coach with a level of power and prestige within the university and in the community, and he or she is the problem with the kid? How do you handle that?
You unfortunately see that all too often at times where I have to, that's a skill in and of itself to teach an athlete to focus on what you can control versus what you can't. And that goes back to even just whether it's a toxic individual or an unhealthy individual, or it's an environment and it's a systemic issue, right? There's a lot of things that we cannot control. And so it's really empowering the individual to say like, okay, it's a choice to continue showing up every day, or you also have a choice. Should you want to, we talk about the transfer portal all day, people deciding to leave. That's a big decision in and of itself. We can talk about that all day. But yes, empowering them to make a choice and then supporting them in that decision, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, I also teach like this is a business too. And so how can you show up, protect your peace, find something that you can find hope in internally, not just extrinsic rewards or externally, but focus on what you can control. And then also radical acceptance. It's learning to accept like, okay, this is how this individual or coach or administrator is going to be. And I have to find that radical acceptance. And how can I protect my peace? Because I can't control that. So it's keeping that disconnect.
No, I like that. Now, Doc, and we see this often where you have in sports, and I'm saying specifically college basketball on the women's side, where they have male coaches, and there's a style that he coaches with, but also, and I'm giving a combination of things, as if a young lady is losing weight, and whether it's anxiety, stress, whatever she's dealing with, how should that male coach handle this situation?
So oftentimes I use empathy and compassion to have that communication. Oftentimes I will ask the coach if they have a child or a daughter to kind of help reframe at times to say, okay, if your daughter came to you and was losing weight, or if you have to make a comment on body image, how would you make that comment? That's one scenario, right? Another scenario is just to use a little bit of, again, empathy, compassion to say, yes, this is a business. It's about performance. It's about being healthy. Language matters though. And so is your language helpful or harmful? And so pause before you say something in reference to that. maybe pause and ask for kind of feedback. Like even coach, you just asked the question. To even have the thought is the first step to say, how can I go about this before saying something? Because you don't want it to be harmful or damaging. You want it to be helpful to say, hey, I'm noticing this about you, or just some changes in, maybe it's your eating patterns. There's just a way to go about saying it in a way that's more sensitive to that individual, and each individual is different.
And Doc, what do you do? Because I've moved quite a bit in my career, and I'm just talking in terms of from Purdue to Missouri State to Tennessee, Cal Berkeley to Missouri. With those moves and having, and with all those moves, Doc, how do you help the kids? Because as coaches, we transition. How do you help the kids? How do you help them?
I'm gonna pause on that one because also being a military kid too, right? Moving a lot. One of the things that I've learned is about you grieve any transition that you go through. So again, school to school, whether it's new school freshman to just first year collegiate athlete, whether it's now transfer portal, get like shifting schools, you have to take a hard pause to reset and reflect on that in between. To kind of just reevaluate anytime, like in transition, like even on the court, right? We think about you have to pause and kind of reflect and change positions, right? And so you do have to get some deposits. It's a hard pause and reassess I like to say my assignment. What's my assignment right now moving forward?
That's what I say too.
And maybe your motivation. Yes. What's my assignment and what's my motivation right now in this season?
Now, Doc, I think, again, this is your profession, this is your world, but I think when COVID hit, everything was like, boom, and it was a whole nother level. I remember, and again, protocol, we had young men that were standing in a hotel room for 14 straight days, and they couldn't leave their room. Somebody had to, when they took the food to them, set it right there in front of the door. I mean, can you imagine 14 straight days? After 2 or 3 days is great because I don't have to go to class and all that, but 14 straight days, it's like, Coach, I can't take this. And it's just, man, that was a tough time, I think, for everybody.
It was. It was almost like this solitary confinement for then getting this illness. And then it made you pause, yes. Right? COVID made people have to pause and think and reset. And yes, even I was talking to a lot of those individuals that were in quarantine in those rooms with the food outside, trying to just be a safe space for them virtually, right? But it is hard. And nobody had the right answers either. We're human, right? So even as an expert in the field or a clinician, I was even like, sometimes I don't have the words to say, and I'm gonna just sit with you right now. And yes, this is tough, but we're gonna figure this out and know you're not alone in figuring this out together. And then I'm also gonna be that advocate to advocate for you outside of this space and these doors there were times when I had to go get packages and was like, I'm getting a box and I'm taking it because we're not doing this. Like this, no.
I think, Doc, what made you good is the parenting ability. And you had a level of compassion, and you poured into the athletes, and I thought that was a real gift. But I also heard you often talk about self-care. So for people that live, what does self-care mean?
Ooh, and well, first of all, thank you for the deposit to me too, for just seeing that I had compassion and pouring into others. Self-care is just that too, being open to receive the deposits that you gave. And I've learned that it's different now in the season that I'm in now in my life than it was before. Maybe as an athlete, it was like, oh, I need to go get a massage or take a pause or, mani-pedis. People think of that. Now I'm like, no, I need soul care. Yeah, that's superficial. That's like one layer. And as God takes me, to new heights and different challenges and different levels and assignments, that self-care is different. It's different. And so I have to constantly, like you said, in transition, reassess and plug back into God, because that's my soul care, to say, God, what am I supposed to do right now? I need you to tell me what it is that I need to do right now. And so in answering your question, self-care, soul care is different for everybody, but you really have to tap into your beliefs, what that is for you in this season that you need it, where you are in your life. So self-care is also self-awareness and the ability to self-assess what you need. And also asking, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm human and I need somebody higher, bigger than me that I can trust, that is a safe space to pour into my soul to tell me, okay, how can I refill my cup so that I can continue to be that overflow or pour into others.
Wow, that's
To me,
powerful.
that's my self-care and soul-care.
That's powerful. I'll go back to a story, and I'm going to bring up one of my former players, and we still have a great relationship to this day. And you know him, Nafis Ricks,
Yes.
a wonderful young man. He's obviously a man and has a family. But we were at Missouri State together. He played for me at Missouri State, and he had signs and things he was dealing with. And back then, nobody really talked about mental health. So you're talking 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. So nobody really talked about it. But there were certain things he was dealing with. And really, he gives me credit for recognizing them. But truthfully, I'm not sure if I recognized. I just had a level of compassion for the young man to see him be successful. And it's just because you didn't know, and you see a lot of stuff coming out today, and obviously he's doing phenomenal work in that field as well.
Yes,
But
sir.
it was really a blessing for me to be able to just say, man, whatever I can do to help you, because I didn't know.
That's amazing.
And I think a lot of coaches deal with that.
What you just said, Coach, was so powerful. And I think oftentimes that's also a skill that I have to teach coaches to say, just have the conversation first. Be able to show the vulnerability, especially as Black men, to say, I don't know, and I'm going to show you some compassion and just say, but I'm going to sit with you while we figure it out. And I'm going to help you find the people to connect you with. Even to share that and hold on to that story is so powerful. And it speaks to the layers that you carried and the many hats that you wore as a coach, because I was a coach too. And oftentimes I had to stop practice and be like, okay, this isn't even about drills and what's going on today. Let's just have a conversation. And that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. So yes, it's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to pause and say, let's figure it out. No different than recruiting and having the conversation.
Okay.
And meeting individuals where they are, going into the home, right? It's more than bringing somebody in and recruiting. It's about relationships. And that's what you just described.
Doc, how do you deal with, because you brought up young Black men, how do you deal with young Black men in this space who didn't have father figures around them, maybe not a lot of positive male figures around? How do you deal with that when they come to your office?
I create space and I'm patient. And so at first it's getting out there in the environments in which they are in, because a lot of times it's that trust first that you have to build and the relationships and rapport, and not taking things personal if they're like, no, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not about to go. Because that's oftentimes that's a learned behavior too. Like, I'm gonna protect that. And like, that's cool. You got my number. Text me when you need me. And then it's just creating that space to know, hey, I'm here. You're gonna see me around. But that's a part of building trust too. So you create space, and oftentimes it's you plant the seed and then you water it. And watering it is allowing space for it to grow, build connections, relationships, and then also that trust. Can I trust you if I'm going to sit with you in that space? Are you going to go tell somebody, especially high performing Black males in these spaces, right? Are you going to go tell somebody? Social media, we can go on and on. Like, can I really trust you with my life, my experiences, my story, my trauma, my hurt, my pain? So it's creating that space and being authentic, transparent, genuine, vulnerability. I can go on and on. I want to ask you too, Coach, even how you continue to create that space, because I know oftentimes you are even that counselor that creates the space to even know to connect to somebody else. Because oftentimes you had to connect many with me, and you were just like, "This is something I see. I just need to connect you with Dr. Collins."
Man, Doc, it was for me. It was a life's mission. I think, and I say this with humility and respect, I think God blessed me to be a leader. I mean, I could recognize that, and people could recognize that when I was a little guy. And there's a responsibility that goes with leadership. I've always wanted to win at the highest level with integrity, work extremely hard, be the toughest guy. All those things I took a tremendous amount of pride in, but it just, my whole soul was making sure young men get where they were trying to go in life. And again, I've said it many times, and you probably heard me say it in speeches, allow me to be your eyes for 10 years down the road, because as an 18 or 22-year-old, you can't see right now, but let me help you. But with that help, there's a lot of trust involved. And then it's like, it's hard to trust because in most cases, Coach, when I grew up, some of the men that looked like you, I didn't really trust them at that level. So you just wanted the guys, and I just said, man, just trust me. Give me a chance, because my word is consistent. I'll stand on what I believe in, and I'll be here until they put me in a casket. And I've always lived by it. I mean, guys, if we had a relationship, we have a relationship till I'm gone. But does it take a lot out of you? Yeah. And there were often, many times, I would be at the dinner table with my family, and I would be at the table, but I wasn't present. Because it was the next mission. What young man is about to call him, what text I'm about to receive, because I had to continue to pour. And it got to a point, I was not only pouring into guys that played for me or played for me in the past or gone, but it was also guys in other programs. Say you didn't get them in recruiting, but when you built a relationship, hey, coach, I got some advice here. Can you help me with this? And it takes a toll in a good way. Like you say, you're planting those seeds. And I always have felt like you got to dig. You're going to consistently dig. So you either digging to plant something to grow, or you digging for caskets. One way or the other, you're doing some digging. And for my whole thing is making sure these young men grow and be the best version of themselves they can become. And it takes a lot out of you. But I'm just happy where I sit today, Doc, because I get a chance to just breathe. And it's like, and I've said it before, I'm 52 years old, but it seemed like when I left East St. Louis at 18 years old, it's like I had track shoes on and boxing gloves on. I was just been running. And just to be able to have peace and breathe is a great feeling.
That's amazing. And I'm going to say hats off to First Lady, too. I saw you had her on the show.
Phenomenal woman, yes.
I know she was pouring into you, too. So that's amazing.
For 31 years.
Yes, sir.
For 31 years, Doc. Okay, so now, you just asked me that. So what advice would you give a coach? Because you've dealt with a lot of athletes. What advice would you give with a coach who's struggling?
So with coaches, I definitely think it goes back to the self-awareness piece. And like you said, being able to pause for a minute. You said you was running and hit the ground running. And a lot of coaches are former athletes themselves. And so oftentimes I've had to tell coaches that, like, okay, you're wearing a different hat. You got to pause a minute because you're not that athlete anymore. And this is not that pursuit for your athletic experience either, right? And so you have to go into even those identities and traumas, even with coaches at times, to say, hey, you shifted, coach. I think you're putting a little bit too much pressure on yourself, and then it's pouring into your team. So like pause, self-reflect a minute, and know that clinicians such as myself are not just there to, just for the student athlete. We're also there for the coaches as well. And oftentimes breaking that stigma to say, like, sessions aren't to talk about the coach or bash the coach. It's also to teach some empathy too, and put the shoe on the other foot for the coach as well. So I do that as well to teach that. But also, just check-ins. I check in on the coaches as well. Just say, hey, you good? Like, y'all okay? Like, you're human too. I mean, oftentimes you turn into robots. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's like, you good? Let me make sure. You okay? Okay.
But Doc, so even as a coach, that world becomes lonely when you're a head coach, so to speak. And even in some cases, assistant coaches, because you hoard stuff and you want to make sure it works right. So how do you form, because I hear a lot of times, support groups. How do you do that when it's hard to trust? Because if I'm in a support group, that means I have to be vulnerable in this group. So how do I learn to trust in that group?
Whew. So that it starts again. I'm gonna go back to self-awareness, because that's the only thing you can control is self. So first, assessing what is causing me to put this wall up. Is there a perceived threat for me in this area for me not to trust or to create a support group, right? Or is it just that amygdala oftentimes, right, when trauma, fight, flight, freeze is stuck, right, in survival mode? Oftentimes you develop in an environment when you're in survival mode. So everybody is a threat at times in front of you. So it takes a minute to kind of assess that and say, like, you know what? I didn't even let you come in because I have this wall up because I've lived in spaces and places where I couldn't trust anybody. It was just every person for themselves. And so I'm not used to that. And that takes vulnerability, self-awareness, and letting the wall down just a little bit, and then it's about consistency. The same way you develop the physical skill set of repetition, consistency, training on the court field, wherever, you got to do that mentally, emotionally, and be consistent there as well. That's the way you become a whole healed person. So it's letting those walls down, and it starts with self, and the lens too, your eyes. Like, how am I seeing? Is my vision blurred? Am I looking from a trauma impaired view? Am I seeing hurt, or am I looking from a healed place to be able to let the wall down?
I like that, Doc. A couple more questions for you, and this is a tough one. But I have to ask it. What do you do when you have an athlete come to say, I want to take my life?
I'm going to sit with that because that's all too many. I have too many stories that I sit with that I hear that from athletes. And so again, it's to assess, one, I want to take my life. Do you have a plan and intent? Do you have the means to do it? So I have to go deeper and really ask those difficult questions to assess. And then it's about developing a safety plan, support system. Oftentimes it is hospitalization, but it is assessing what that individual's needs are in that moment. I also, from a culturally competent lens, if it's a Black male, Black female in my space, at times there are deeper layers that I do have to go because I'm not quick to call the police or go to a hospital. Oftentimes I have to step in because I know there's also fear with going to a hospital or calling the police. And oftentimes there's clinicians that don't understand even that layer that could cause more trauma. And so you do have to sit. And then it's also that God-given wisdom and discernment in addition to clinical skills to say, like, God, meet me right now and help me help this individual the best way that I know how and that I can. And so it is case by case, but there's layers to that. It's having the conversation, it's asking the difficult questions, and then unpacking that and having additional layers to check and support as we go on and putting all those individuals into place. And that's that safety plan, the support system. Sometimes it's phone calls to parents, coaches, administrators. Yes.
And Doc, people see you and they'll see you at the University of Louisville, have your own private practice, very successful. But was it a smooth road to get where you are? Because oftentimes everybody say, because this podcast, it all counts and everything goes within it, because even the good and bad, they see you now, but was the road a bumpy one?
Ooh, it was such a bumpy one. Oh, it was, and it definitely all counts. I would not change a thing, Coach. I would not change a thing because it made me so much better. It made me even more empathetic and compassionate for individuals that I sit with each day. It made me be more open and dependent and lean on God even more. I mean, he says he's strongest in our time of weakness. That's how I developed my relationship with God. I even say, like, so I'll have all my degrees up in my office and one of the frames broke and fell, right? And there's this crack on it, on the glass. And I'm like, oh, I need to get a new frame because those are expensive. I paused, Coach, and was like, I'm not getting a new frame. Because you know what? It was not a pretty journey. And I had cracks. And there are times I cried taking stats classes because school wasn't easy for me. People probably like, oh, look at all those degrees. Like, you're so smart. You love school. No, sir. So it all counts. There were tears. Success is not linear. If I told you more about my story and my background, even the trauma that was in my past, people would not believe it because the things that God does, but it all counts. And I'm grateful and makes me a better person, a better mom, a better human, a better clinician. The list goes on, and I wouldn't change a thing. But no, it was not perfect. I am perfectly imperfect. And I'm not afraid to be vulnerable or transparent or share that because it makes me a better human and clinician because I'm not.
Doc, I have 2 questions for you. One is, how do you feel about, because you're strong in your faith, do you feel that conflicts with your job? How do you feel about that?
I don't. So I don't push that on anybody. It makes me who I am and it pours into me. And I'm very aware of my relationship and my faith. I meet each individual where they are. And oftentimes I do sit and say, if you don't believe in God, that's your choice, but what do you believe in? What do you lean on? Hope in something, right? That's going to motivate you. That's bigger than you. So oftentimes it's sitting with individuals to even find that, as a clinician. And then there are times when individuals that say, I do believe and I do want to utilize that in this space, and doing like more faith-based spiritual, counseling. So then I incorporate that. But again, I meet the individual where they are, but it doesn't take away from who I am and who I serve and who I know pours into me daily.
Amen.
Because again, that's my soul care.
Amen. My last question, Doc. Is there anything in this world you would change, do over, or make better?
I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't do anything over. Because again, it goes back to making me who I am today. Things I would make better is pausing to just take one day at a time, one step at a time. Constantly being open to grow, develop, become. Even in sessions as I sit and I'm pouring into others, they're pouring into me daily. This conversation is pouring into me. It's just being open to receive knowledge. And it's not just about books or education. It's also about lived experiences, being open to, hear someone else's experience. So doing better is just continuing to check in on self, taking one day at a time, one step at a time. And like you originally said, being okay, being at peace and not having to be in the pursuit of something constantly, right? And attain something constantly, but just be in the present moment today and being open to learn, grow, develop, and be poured into. So I'm in the season of receiving right now.
Amen. We count it all joy. There you have it, a phenomenal guest, Dr. Brittany Collins. A lot of information for all people all over the world. And remember, it all counts. And make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.